everyone. Okay, it's
All
time,
right.
right?
Yep.
All right. Well, welcome everybody and cheers. Nice to see everybody. Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you. You know, we're always excited to get together with our friends. We're very excited today because I get to introduce friends that I work with. You know, it's Centerpoint for Children, Emma and her mom, Karen Claudius. And so we'll start with you guys in a minute, and then our friends from the UK that we've known for decades and we've worked with and taught with, and they have sort of been pioneers and leaders in working using sensory integration, assessment, and intervention with adults. So I'm really excited to be here with everybody. And of course, we have Katie and Marco and Zoe, our little classy team. So I just like to start with Karen and then maybe Emma. So Karen, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your practice?
Sure, yeah. I'm licensed marriage and family therapist, and I've been in private practice in Southern California, Irvine. And like Suzanne said, I get to be collaborative. We're in the same working space now in the same suite, which is just so exciting because the collaboration between psychotherapy and OTs, I just think is crucial. We've just seen some wonderful things happen when we can serve a particular family on from both angles, both places. Let's see, I've been in private practice for about 25 years, and it took I took on a new specialty when with Emma coming into my life. This is my daughter, Emma Claudius. Say hi for a minute. Come here, say hi. You'll get more time later. Yeah, thank you. And she is 22 years old and was diagnosed when she was 2 years old on the autism spectrum. And at 2.5, we were introduced to occupational therapy and sensory integration. We had the God sent to meet a wonderful woman named Suzanne Greenwood, now Suzanne Cachero. And she became Emma's OT. And little did I know, also became my teacher and now good friend about occupational therapy. And it has affected my practice, but it also has affected mine and Emma's lives as she grew. And yeah, so I could go on and on, but maybe that's a good start. And I don't know, maybe this is a good place, Suzanne, to show Emma's movie to get to know her, and then maybe she could answer a couple of the questions. She wrote up some answers since it takes her a little bit of time. Oh, I should say, Emma is a non-speaker, or we say limited speaker at this point, because she is actually still learning to speak more. And she communicates on a letterboard like this. She also goes to college, and she takes with her her iPad. There's a lot of different programs now that she could type with. She uses Proliquo text. And I don't know if you can see that really well, but she can type up things and save it so that then she doesn't need to spend the time doing it and people's patience, you know? So, yeah. So, but she gets asked to be an advocate. It's one of her favorite things to do for people that are non-speakers and with autism. And so she wrote a movie, and she and her support staff put it into a short video. And so that's what she'd like to share, and then you can get to know her a little better that way.
Thanks. I think Katie's got that cued.
Here we go. Have your movie.
I am Emma Claudius. I'm a student at Vanguard University in Costa Mesa, California. I'm an English major there, currently in my 4th year of studies to be a screenwriter. I have 10 classes under my belt and going strong. I'm so glad I'm able to tell my college story. I love to do this time together with you. I hope to give you insight and hope for the future. Good to tell you that my road so far has been a tough one. It is also good to tell you that it has been wonderful and full of good surprising times at college. I think it is imperative to have a good communication partner in order to do your best work and to participate fully in classes and around campus. Being able to type has allowed me to be a part of the community. I get to participate during class, do group work, and hang with friends. The support person needs to be on the hopeful, positive side of things. They need to believe in you and your abilities. They need to be comfortable in their own skin and at college so that when things get tough for you in any way, they can be solid and help. Mary is my communication partner who has helped me so much. She gives me confidence and allows me to have my own voice. It's important for me to have my own voice because I am a human who has lots of great creative ideas. The world needs people to share their ideas in order to have a community with hope. We as typers are here to contribute to those ideas. It is great thinking of myself as a screenwriter and part of the community at Vanguard University. I have a goal to do this great work for God, and screenwriting will be the delivery method. I think when you decide to attend college, you are taking your life into your own hands. You're saying, I can do this. I have interests. I have this difficulty, but it is not going to stop me from having a wonderful, fulfilling life. Typing has allowed me to be able to share with my support team what those interests are. Typing has shown the world that I can do it. I am able to advocate for myself, to express myself and what I need. I am so thankful for the people along my life's journey who have supported me and included me in so many ways. Carrie Kimball, the disabilities coordinator at my university, is now one of these support persons. She helps me with choosing my classes and to communicate with professors how to best include me. She believes in me and gives me hope for the future.
At my time here at Vanguard, we've never had a student who was nonverbal before, so this was going to be a very unique experience, and I knew it was going to be very new for me and for Vanguard. And so it's been such a really cool, exciting, different opportunity for us to be able to navigate working with our faculty and supporting Emma the best way we can. And it's been a really neat experience.
I want to share some of the special things college has brought me. It is a place to go with others my age who are all seeking a future. Good energy and ideas swirl around me while I'm on campus. It is amazing how stimulating that can be. With really anything I do as a student, there needs to be a blend of being myself and fitting into campus life. I believe we typers have so much to offer a college campus. We have this new, different way of seeing the world. So the challenge is, how do we give our best so that our teachers and fellow students can open their hearts and minds to us, and at the same time we can get the education we're hoping for. It is magical when you see the lights go on in the professor's eyes or in the eyes of other students. They not only realize that you're smart, but they really see you. They see your ideas and your talents. They come to see you as a peer. I crave opportunities to interact with fellow students regardless of our challenges. These times have been pleasant surprises to me of others not only being kind and open, but also wanting to get to know me. I am a part of a Bible study on campus. It is so great to have like-minded people supporting each other. We talk about school or anything going on in our lives. We share our thoughts about God and things He puts on our hearts. We also pray for each other. Because I am able to communicate, I have these wonderful friendships. It can be frustrating to only type to communicate, and it can go slowly, but most people are patient and don't seem to mind. All of this is a blessing. It just takes a lot of energy. Sometimes I need to stay in bed all day watching videos, and then I'm ready to try again. Another incredibly helpful support to me is the Typing Friendship Group. I've been a part of this group for years. Being with other typers who are challenging the norms of what society says we can and cannot do has helped spur me on. We share our experiences and our hopes and dreams. We celebrate each other's achievements like no others can. We have a full knowledge of what it truly takes each of us to accomplish our goals. We pray when we see setbacks from health or anxiety issues and know these will pass. So I encourage you to find some friends who are like you who type and communicate differently. Meet together to support each other and have fun hanging out too. I hope to communicate with typers and all others to be included fully in this world. As a non-speaker, my life can be difficult, but I will do my best to overcome and use my typing to communicate and really give as much to this world as I can.
Yay. Thanks, Emma, for sharing that with us. I get all verklempt. We know that happens, and Susie Greenwood would even be more. If the two of us got together, we would just be a mush. So,
well, it's beautiful. It's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Really great. It's so great we could share that with all of our friends too around the world. Thank you, Emma and Karen.
Yes, you're welcome. Yeah, you can see little bits in there of how Emma still needs pressure quite often. She'll grab when she's at school or with her friends, and we still have her swing from when she was 2.5 up on our big pine tree, and she still goes out and takes care of herself, getting regulated out there. I think Asia suggested putting up a hammock to me, and we got one of those, and she goes out and does that. So many ways, throughout the years, and still see how important it is to get that input and sensory stuff into our life.
well, I had sent a couple questions to Emma that she could maybe answer in advance. So I didn't mean to give you a lot of homework, Emma, so hopefully that didn't feel like a chore.
No.
But I did wonder about the journey, because she's worked with Susie Greenwood and OT for so many years and so closely. What your experiences were with sensory integration.
Yeah, this first one, let's see, I think she was answering, I've got her answers here. Hopefully it'll come through. I'll put it up loud. This was just her experience with working with Suzanne. She calls Suzanne Greenwood Suze, just because it's always been easier for her to say. So.
Yes, I think working in the gym with Suze was great. She helped me find my body in space and time. It was the swinging at first, then all the pressure stuff we did, and most of all, that she believed in me and we had so much fun together.
So that was, and then you had asked Suzanne if Emma had any thoughts or ideas for other therapists, and she had written that up. Here we go.
I think all therapists should take the time to really understand each child. They are all different and gifted in their own unique way. Don't worry about what they cannot do. Find what they are good at and help them grow from there. For example, I am this person who people think can't think. I do think, have dreams, and goals, and I am smart too.
So
that's very wise.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so those were the two that she chose to answer.
Oh, thank you.
If you weren't going to be a filmmaker, Emma, I think you'd make a great occupational therapist.
She still loves coming in the gym. When we're passing through, and she loves watching the other kids on the swings and everything. It's like, wow. I remember that. Yeah.
And Karen, were there any, kind of moments, outstanding moments that you can think of in the journey with Susie?
Let me think. Wow, outstanding moments. I feel like it was such an amazing process that we went through. I guess as a parent, understanding Emma's needs was so important, and I think that is so crucial. Suzanne was able to break down her sensory system for me so I could help her more at home. Whether it was like putting up a swing or our own little gym or getting her swimming. That pressure always made her feel so good so she could have a good day. Taking breaks in class so she could make it through school, and being able to take in the information, because she was regulated versus all out of sorts. I think as a professional, I saw myself start to understand everybody in this way differently. Instead of just coming from a psychological, they're all up here, that their whole body was affecting them, especially people that I treat that I see have had trauma. I see them now that they usually have a sensory issue that needs to be addressed. Yeah, it's been kind of a remarkable journey. Yeah, I think that regulation piece and Suzanne being able to teach us how to help her regulate her body so that she could work at her max has been the most significant part. And the relationship piece, I think Emma mentioned that we had, she said that we had so much fun kind of thing. I think their rapport was just so key. And as a parent, my rapport with Suzanne too, she was just such a support to our entire family, and being able to say, oh my gosh, this is happening or that's happening, and her being able to help break that down and brainstorm with us, and her seeing Emma from a different point of view, of course, than her parents. Yeah.
And then just one more question, just about the practice. So in terms of your practice, you're mostly working with adults, but I think you and Susie had a very collaborative relationship there. So anything you could share about that? Like how does that collaboration work, and how is that mutually beneficial?
Yeah, when Emma was young, I was your typical parent that was driving from one place to the next, to the next, to the next, to see OT, to see speech, to get an evaluation. And I was like, wow, this whole world I never knew existed. And so Suzanne and I started putting our heads together about making a clinic type situation where the OTs and the speech and everybody was in one place so that everyone could talk. And I think it's really worked well, and it's been a referral back and forth where I will get a couple referred to me that has a special needs child of some way and find out that they don't have OT or they have very minimal support. And I'm able to say, well, we have a gym here. Let me, introduce you to, and then I'm able to, the other way around, they'll send the parents when they realize the system's just out of whack. They can only do so much work with the child because things are falling apart at home. And then we're able to support in a more full way. So, yeah.
Thanks so much.
Yes, you're welcome.
Well, what I'd like to do is get Roz and Kath engaged a little bit more in the discussion as well, because they both have immense experience and also work quite, I think maybe Roz, your current practice is quite multidisciplinary. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about yourselves. I don't know, Kath, if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself.
I I'm Kath Smith. I'm an occupational therapist. I'm South African originally, and when I worked in South Africa, a lot of the work I did was with families and with grandparents as well, so the much bigger extended family as well. And when I came to work in the UK, I started working again with families and with parents, mums and dads who had a learning disability, supporting them and realizing how many of their needs were similar to their children. And from there moved into working with adults with learning disabilities and mental health difficulties, and particularly interested in trauma because I'd worked with young people with trauma in South Africa and with adults with trauma who've had childhood trauma and then grown up to be adults in mental health settings. So my passion is working with groups of people, families, parents.
Mhm. And Roz, you're muted, but maybe you could tell us. There you are.
Okay, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Great, thank you for telling me that. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to say I'm from England. I trained and have grown up in the UK. I'm also an occupational therapist, and I started my journey in working in the National Health Service. Was there for far too long, 30 years, working with adults and children with complex needs. And we say learning disabilities, but I think a lot of you will recognize that clinical group as intellectual disabilities. Yeah. And I've really started working out in my journey, recognizing that a lot of the challenging behavior that my colleagues were saying were problems with adults and young people with learning disabilities actually were telling, you could interpret and say, no, I think this person is showing us how they're trying to get the intensity of sensory input that they seek. And so a lot of my early sort of work was around just working behavioural units, working in inpatient units, and starting my training and journey with understanding and learning about sensory integration. And it's been amazing. I think particularly for occupational therapists, I had a fantastic team with me working in Dorset, and we gradually built up our skills and our training and our knowledge across the adult teams, the learning disability teams, the inpatient units, and really making a difference. And I loved hearing your story, Emma, because I think the most important thing is how can we understand everybody's unique strengths and how that is so often misinterpreted as possibly challenging behavior, but actually turn that into very positive strengths, ways in which everybody can contribute in a meaningful way. And that's been very much the sort of the journey as well around working with carers. Sadly, for a lot of the ones that we were working with in the NHS, they didn't have family close by. But gradually sort of a lot of sort of education, a lot of working with them to then bring them through and sort of get them involved in activities. And certainly I know some of you will be familiar that I then did my master's and looked at the effectiveness of sensory integration therapy in 5-6 adults with learning disabilities and seeing if that made a difference to their participation. And boy, it certainly did. So I've been hooked since then. And more recently, been really privileged to be able to work and develop. I really was passionate about wanting to try and have our own sensory integration clinic, gym, so that we could actually do direct work with young people, with adults. So it's just down the road from me here. And I'm working with a child psychiatrist and teaching autism consultant and a wider multidisciplinary team of teachers and psychologists, clinical psychologists and OTs, and all about trying to get that integration and involvement in everyday life.
Mhm.
that's me for the moment.
Yeah, okay. I don't know, Zoe, if you had anything.
Well, I'm just so happy to have this group together. Thank you all for your time and for sharing with us. We've had a number of questions. Shall we dive into those, Suzanne?
Sure. Yeah.
So one of the questions is about the use of the kind of traditional sensory integration equipment and how you adapt that or use that in your work with adults. Maybe we'll start with you, Kath.
Yeah, so I think when people first think about sensory integration clinics, they think about the swings and the ball pools and like, what's an adult going to do with those things? And yet there are many adults who, when they're growing up, play is hard, play is difficult for them. So the opportunity to play and be playful in adulthood is as appropriate as for young people. We all need to suspend reality sometimes and just to feel joy and to be able to be curious and wonder and it not have to be end product focused. But for some people that is scary and that's tricky because you're asking them to fill a space with nothingness. And they're used to being driven to do something. So using things like gym equipment, so things like a cross trainer or a rowing machine is often a way to encourage people to engage with you initially. But we have swings, Southpaw make swings that are suitable for adults. They have equipment that we can put the suspension up, it's strong enough. And it is about every single person being individual and going at the pace somebody's able to. But then there are other activities we do which are playful, baking and cooking together socially. It's got a playful element to it and it's very sensory rich. Things like being outdoors in the garden. Sometimes competitive sports, and when I say competitive, I mean a game, a ball game, things you can do outside. Those are other opportunities. Going riding on a bicycle with someone, which might then link onto something else that's very sensory rich. Because for many of our clients, what they do with us in the clinic and the gym, we want to become a part of their everyday life. So it's making those links and connections for people.
I think that's such a good point about the balance between maybe giving an opportunity for adults, all adults, to get back in touch with the inner child and to be able to play. You know, when we have our courses and even with therapists who maybe haven't experienced the equipment, we see such a transformation when we encourage them to try the equipment, and then they can, you know, really feel what it does to their body, to their nervous system, and you see the playfulness come out. Also with parents, you know, when we have children in therapy and we're able to include the parents on the equipment, we see such a transformation. So there's that balance of recognizing the importance of these sensory experiences at all ages, and then also balancing that with some activities that maybe would be more, quote, age appropriate to get some of the same sensations. How about you, Roz? Do you have anything to add to that?
Oh, masses. I think you made a really good point there, Zoe, about what might be age appropriate. And I think a lot of our colleagues think, how can it be age appropriate to be, in effect, making use of what seems to be a playful space? But that's so important to think as well about what might be developmentally appropriate. So that's what really taught me very early on, was so many of the adults and young people that I've had the privilege to work with has shown me how they have been terrified of moving out into different spaces, of moving their bodies. And the wonderful thing about the therapy gyms, the SI gyms, is they come in there and they go, oh, where has this been all my life? They can move their bodies, they can get down, they can feel safe, and suddenly start to connect and feel and know how to motor plan and move. That takes a lot of work. And another really important comment that really resounded for me was one of, I was working with a chap who shared an awful lot. He was in his mid-30s. He was referred to OT for cooking skills because he was always getting food poisoning. He won't mind me telling you this, because he didn't know how to organize himself. His flat was a complete mess. He used to do a lot of bicycling. He had huge mental health problems, was forever being admitted to hospital. He just had no idea how to manage, and he was forever taken to bed. When he was able to choose and come into an SI space, his first thing was to say, I've never known how to play. Is this play? And I thought what was really important was that he video recorded so that he could take back and look and go back through the sessions to see what he looked like and how his body was moving. And he wanted to then come back and say, can we do that target game again? Because I want to see if I can do that better. I've decided I need to do more with my legs, say if he was on the platform swing. And I think that dialogue, that sort of going together and having fun, and as a therapist showing that I'm rubbish at doing it this way too, is really, really an important part of that sort of going back through that journey for those adults who've completely missed out on that playful experience.
I loved what Emma said about finding her body with Susie. And I had the privilege to meet a young woman that Kath had treated for quite a while. And I don't know the whole history, but I think this was not a woman who was diagnosed with something severe early in her life. But as an adult, she was really struggling. So maybe you could tell us, because she made enormous progress, and I got to see her in your clinic space using the equipment, and she was very articulate about how magnificent the changes were for her.
I think for people who have not used their body and have not experienced how it feels to move in a fluid way, when they suddenly discover that they can do it, it's like a whole world opens up, a world where you don't feel awkward and that you're bumping into things and knocking things over. And that then frees people up in their imagination to be playful. I think the person that you're talking about, the young person that you're speaking about, her history of a very late diagnosis meant that she had spent a lot of time thinking, I'm different, I'm unusual, I don't fit, there's something really wrong with me. And then with that came anxiety, and that broke down her resilience. And so having a reformulation and understanding about why life had been tricky and tough was really powerful for her, and allowed her to suspend all the past learning, all the negative diagnoses she collected along the way, including of an eating disorder, which wasn't an eating disorder, had a sensory piece to it, including of being clumsy, including of a low IQ, when in fact she was busy getting a degree. All of those negative experiences then become something that someone can make sense of. And then because they're free to move, because they understand why it's hard, so it doesn't matter, you can try again, you can have another go. That hopefulness that it can be different is what is so powerful. And as a therapist, you're just an agent to that. You're just there supporting the person because they're doing the work themselves. We're just there kind of on the side scaffolding. And kind of, I sometimes describe myself as, I'm there as a resource. I'm kind of holding a sign that says, try that way, maybe try this way, maybe you want to try another way, and it's that lack of judgment and that often the people have had, and that it's okay to laugh and joke about it. And I myself am very dyspraxic, so I trip over my own feet. The therapists, they're all laughing. I can see Zoe and Suzanne laughing at me, but I trip over my own feet. I'm interested in sensory integration because I'm hypermobile. I spend time in a splint and on crutches, so I have some of the motor challenges that some of the children I've worked with had. I've had those experiences, being the one who the teachers say, what on earth did you do to your hair? You've not managed to tie it up properly. It looks like a badly thatched roof. And so when you've, or a red line through my handwriting. So when you kind of share that and it's okay to laugh at yourself and be playful, that's really powerful stuff for our clients.
And, some of the questions were, well, which adults could we apply sensory integration? And I know that case that I was thinking of is a woman who relatively typically developing, but Roz, you worked with very difficult, right, in the NHS with rather severe behaviors institutionalized, right? So maybe you could, I think your case study, right, was on a young man who, maybe you could tell us a little bit.
I think you've probably seen several of my young men who have been just amazing and taught me such a lot. And I've also been privileged in so many of our colleagues who are working in adult mental health forensic units and learning disabilities have shared their case studies. I think the thing that comes across so importantly is really important assessment and being able, particularly if they've got a diagnosis maybe late in life, they haven't had the diagnosis while they were children, so they completely missed out on occupational therapy services. If they're an adult with autism, making sure that you can start to work with them. And I had one lady who came to me only 2 summers ago, and she came on 2 sticks with the dark glasses and, you know, shielding from all the light, and she was pretty much confined to home. And she had, as it turned out, she had huge balance problems, gravitational insecurity, amongst a lot of reactivity and sensitivities. But once she started to understand where this was all coming from, she really worked hard, particularly Kath was using the sensory ladders, and started to try things out, and particularly worked in the sensory gym with balance. And she wanted to really push herself. And within 12 sessions, didn't need the sticks any longer, was walking both her dogs, big Labradors, you know what Labradors are like, very boisterous. And she'd actually had the courage to enroll in a local class, which was an aqua aerobics. And she said, wow, this is fun. She didn't think she could have so much fun in a swimming pool. But it was then suddenly connecting and realizing what was, you know, the leisure opportunities that were out there, and rearranging home and being able to do that. Have I answered your question, Suzanne? I think the other thing that I found really, really helpful is when working with the more complex adults, with the multidisciplinary team, particularly using the DDM, the data-driven decision-making process. Thanks, Zoe.
No, thanks, Roseanne. We have to recognize.
Yeah, absolutely, Roseanne. Because as the OT within the team, being able to, you know, start to identify the strengths. And Emma, your video, your film is so important because you have pulled out the strengths, what really helped you, so that we can see what the strengths are and then put it in the context of where the challenges are. And again, as a team, there might have been a lot of positive behavioral difficulties, but actually starting to get that whole cluster and working through and saying, being able to have the evidence in an adult context and adult teams and mental health to be able to say, I have evidence that this cluster, this group of behaviors actually may indicate that this person is definitely having problems with processing the sensations in their environment. And we were very fortunate about 6-7 years ago that the NICE guidance, which guides commissioning of services, put into the adult, for adults with autism, the requirement to assess and treat for sensory sensitivities and to make environmental modifications to enable those people to be able to function within those environments.
Yeah, so that's a good segue. We had some questions come in prior and also in the chat box about assessment. And so maybe we can talk a little bit about that. I also just wanted to maybe give a heads up to Karen that we might come to you after this, I'd like to hear a little bit more about what you, maybe some of the things you did at home and how you transitioned from some activities in childhood that you and Emma used, and how you made those transitions across the, you know, developmental spectrum into her adulthood. But why don't we start with the assessment question, because we've had kind of a lot of questions about that. Kath, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
So I think what's really important is that a lot of the assessment that we do with adults is very similar to the assessment process that we would follow when we work with children and teenagers. So having the data-driven decision-making process to guide us to think about how we start those conversations. And it, you know, it depends on where our clients come from and the story that they're telling us. But, you know, ultimately we're going to be screening somebody to decide, is this even a sensory integration problem, or is it something else? Because I'm an OT first and foremost. So that's my first point of call. And so we might use tools from occupational therapy tools, which are about things like the model of human occupation, the MOHOS, to help us think about what is difficult in the person's everyday life. I'd never have imagined that I would set a therapy goal for one lady to cook scrambled egg without falling over, but that ended up being our very best outcome of her therapy. And she said, please, you know, I can cook scrambled egg without falling over. But to get to know what to do as part of treatment, we wanted a thorough assessment, which includes things like using the adult-adolescent sensory history, which is a relatively new tool. We didn't used to have it. When we started out, there were very few tools. But that tool from the Spiral Foundation, the results correlate very nicely when we do more formal testing, using things like the sensory integration and praxis test. And although the SIPT was developed as a tool with a clinical population aimed at children when Gina's developed it, there is evidence in the SIP manual. We can read about some of the norms that she found for adults. There are papers around post-rotary nystagmus scores for adults. And if we're mindful about our interpretation and knowing that, you know, an adult who is 35, whose scores on postural praxis and bilateral motor coordination and oral praxis are really low, is going to be an adult who's got difficulties with social interaction, an adult who's got difficulties with planning and organizing their body. If they want to go to an aerobics class or a gym class, they're likely to have problems with things like riding a bike or being able to drive a car. And so we can use those tests, and we think very carefully about how we then interpret them. So there are lots of tools available. The adult neurological observations, Gina's used them to develop the ClinOps. She drew from adult neurological observations. So we can be mindful when we use the ClinOps, and we can use adult neurological observations, but we have to alter them. So if you spin an adult 10 times, you make them really sick. I was talking to Tarina in South Africa, and we were talking about how we measure PRN in adults this morning, in fact, and we were talking about the fact that sometimes we do standing and walking balance and people can't put one foot in front of the other because they're slightly larger than maybe the children that we work with, although we wouldn't do prone extension, getting them to lie flat on the floor, but we might look at how do they stand up out of a chair or stand up from being over the oven and go into extension. So we have to adapt what we do, but we do it with sound neuroscience driving our clinical reasoning. But it's also important to know when it's not sensory, very important to know when it's not sensory. And so mentoring and peer support is really important.
Yes, and I really want to express our gratitude to all of you, to your group, Kath and Roz, for your pushing us to use tools like the sensory integration and praxis test with adults, and really, you know, I think many of us had experimented a little bit, but you really showed us the importance and how successful you have been with using these tools carefully, cautiously. I think it really encouraged us with the new test, the evaluation in Ayres Sensory Integration, the EASY, to go up to age 12, and then we are counting on groups like yours to help us understand how we can use that tool with adults as well. So hopefully we'll have that available to us soon. Roz, I don't know if you want to add anything about assessment, and then maybe we'll go to Karen and Emma.
Not a lot. I think, I mean, for me, one of the early tools that was really important was Judith Reisman and Han Shu's sensory integration inventory for individuals with developmental disabilities, because that was a lovely observational report that carers and parents could give, and provided an excellent context to be able to then put into a clinical reasoning tool to be able to start to think, yep, we've got lots of areas that we can see are a problem and could indicate sensory processing difficulties. I also think you, particularly when you're working with adults, I always feel it's a little bit like unpeeling the layers of an onion, because these, a lot of the adults I've worked with have done an amazing job of actually getting or avoiding the sensory integration, the sensory processing things they need. And it's so often interpreted as maladaptive behavior. But if you start to unpick that and can get a history from the parents, then you actually go back and you see, actually, here is a person who always had those difficulties, but it was not recognized or treated. And so now we've got an adult who has adapted as best they can, and is just about managing, or is managing, their environment until there is a change. And it's often, you know, our colleagues will say, and parents will say, and carers will say, well, they were doing fine, but then something changed. Then the environment changed. Then where they were living changed. We did a big move of adults with learning disabilities from small units into their own homes, which actually went pretty successfully. The OTs were involved a lot, and one of the key things that was very important was just working out whether they should have a bath or a shower, because of all the challenges that do you avoid or like a shower or a bath? And of course the local authorities were only looking at, well, they're physically able to get into a bath, so they're going to have a bath. No, that's not going to work. So I think it's just, you know, just using all the tools and the observations, and as Kath was saying, just bringing it all together. And that's again where I think the DDDM is really helpful in trying to pull all of that together.
You know, when I've used the SIP, the sensory integration and praxis test with adults, what's interesting to me is that sometimes, you know, a lot of things are good and they score really well, and you don't know, are they scoring as well as you would with another adult? But then you see these areas that are difficult, and many of these adults or young adults can tell me that's really hard. Now, how do you expect children to do this? That's impossible to do. And you go, okay, I think we found an area of need. And so even though the SIP certainly is not designed for adults, we don't have normative data on adults, when those sensory integration and praxis features aren't integrated in adults, it's something that we can address in therapy. And I think it informs our clinical reasoning as therapists. And you know, just to put in a plug there, I think that watching you guys analyze so many cases when we're doing the courses together with adults, the clinical reasoning is what's informed by this. The adults are complex. There's many things you have to consider, but this is something that we shouldn't leave out because we don't have that normative data.
I think that's really important. I think, because I think you don't find new knowledge and you don't discover new things if you don't have a go, but it's having the people around you to support you. And I think we're very fortunate that Suzanne, Zoe, Dr. Diane Parham, Diana Henry, Theresa May Benson, Roseanne Schaff, Shelley Lane. I hope I've not left anybody out. I once had to present. I once had to present to all of them. The first time ever that I saw them all in a room together, and I said, "Oh look, it's like the big five at Safari if they all trooped in." and I was shaking. I could barely, you know, but these were all the people that when we got stuck and we weren't sure, and that would caution us and pull us back sometimes and say, think carefully, what is this you're seeing? So without their mentoring and support and wisdom, we wouldn't be where we are, and we wouldn't feel like we've got tiny little baby wings. And they are tiny little baby wings, and we sometimes wade in where maybe other people might fear to go, but we've done that with the support of our colleagues all over the world. I want to mention Vivian Ayres in South Africa, because her work in psychiatry and the work of Lorna Jean King were things I grew up with in my university program, and I was fortunate to I taught Vivian Ayres. So she said to me, "You're teaching me." I said, "No, I'm not. You are the great person that gave me advice." And she used to send me faxes with information in England from South Africa at you know, in early 2000, when I was asking difficult questions that people, it seemed to think, were a bit too scary for me to, I shouldn't be asking them about how you use sensory integration with adults. And she was very generous with her time and her messages to me. So she's sadly not with us, but it would have been nice to have her here.
Yeah, Kath, I mean, Vivian, I mean, speaking of Vivian, our friend who's passed, she was very invested in trauma, working with individuals with sensory issues and trauma. And so I don't know, Karen, you've been quiet for a while. Maybe we want to pull you back in, because there are some questions here about what about that? What about working with individuals with trauma? And some of the areas are, you know, people who have had traumatic events, or refugees, or, you know, what about that?
You know, I haven't seen a lot of severe trauma. I think similar to what Kath and Roz are talking about. I see it more in a subtle way when I'm working with couples. You know, as simple as, wow, I can't stand he talks so much, I look at it in a very different way now, because a lot of times it's not that he's talking so much, it's that she's traumatized, she's flooded, she's overwhelmed, and we need to have some understanding then in the relationship on how they can work with that. And then me being able to bring that to light, and it's kind of like an aha moment, like, oh my gosh, you know, it makes things in such a different way that they can start to learn to integrate and help each other. I see it with the older, the young adults that I work with on the spectrum, of course. They've got their autism or their special needs issues, but then they also have a lot of trauma in their lives, because growing up autistic is very difficult. And a lot of them have gone through a lot of traumatic things that shouldn't just be pushed under as, oh, well, you know, that happens when you're on the spectrum. They need to work through that. And then different sensory things, if they haven't had OT, if they haven't had anybody give them that. It's wonderful what both of you are saying, that they can go into a gym. And I think we don't have a lot of that around here. I think it's starting to become more where there's more older facilities, or gyms will accommodate more. But I know that was a big lack, trying to figure out when Em was kind of done with the clinic, what else, you know. And Suzanne, again, had just an amazing imagination. She taught Emma how to stand up paddle. And that was just unbelievable. Like, what? You know, it blew my mind, you know, but she could get out there on a paddle board, and she could do, you know, talk about sensory integration, the water, the wind, the visual piece, all that stuff with her. And Emma had typed, please tell them I need to still swim and walk on the beach, or everything will fall apart for me. And just bring that education, that now she owns that and she knows that, so that when her world starts to fall apart, she can say, I need to go walk. I can't sit down and do this work, or I can't get through my day. And I think that's an important part of that trauma piece too, regardless how deep the trauma is or not. Is like, how can we empower someone to understand their own system and what they need in their world, and what they can rely on their support staff or the people in their lives to help them with. It's just so crucial.
One of the fears that I always had working with people, vulnerable people, was, is what I'm doing helpful, or am I contributing to their stress? You know, so as I had imperatives as a clinician to accomplish goals, to be a good therapist, and in order to be a good therapist, then my clients had to reach their goals, or I wasn't a good therapist. And sometimes I was like, I'm just not going to, I'm not going to work on goals, because I think maybe some very well-intentioned humans providing therapy are adding to the trauma. I have that concern.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think you've because you're such an informed parent, you've been able to circumvent those sorts of therapies that might have been more traumatizing.
Yeah, I think it goes back to kind of what Roz had picked up on, that Emma was sharing too, that boy, everyone's an individual, and if we can take their lead, I think that's where we can figure out, are we being helpful, or is this a hindrance? You know, we can, you know, introduce things, we can try, but then it's like, okay, what do we see happens next for them? What's their experience of that? And then, you know, making sure, like in Emma's case, one of the most crucial things I had to learn was find out what she thinks. And of course, with the speech challenge, the better she grew in being able to communicate and type and tell me, was like, wow. But I think we get on a roll and we forget, well, what is the experience of the actual person? What are they actually experiencing, and what can they, you know, help guide us in?
Can I say something about the clients with trauma? Because a lot of the work I've done is with clients who have early trauma, because they end up receiving a diagnosis of either emotionally unstable personality difficulties, or some of them receive a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. They're not terms that I like, because I think they are people often who've had terrible early trauma, and they end up with huge regulation difficulties. But I think the importance is that sensory integration practitioners aren't working alone. You're working part of that multidisciplinary team, and that you're using other skills and techniques. So I often combine sensory integration with dialectical behavior therapy, and the two work together. And because you're part of a team, there is, and you have a shared narrative that you develop with the person, there is that ongoing discussion that helps look after everybody. And particularly dialectical behavior therapy is very helpful in the whole team taking responsibility, not just the one therapist for someone's care. So I think it's important to remember that we're not just doing sensory integration. Sometimes it is the combination with complex clients that requires other skills in our toolbox, in our OT toolbox, or our, and I think that that's really, really important for us to remember. But sensory integration is very powerful with people with trauma. It doesn't matter whether they looked after children or whether they are people who've had trauma, you know, involved in war. I've worked with people who've been merchant soldiers, and for all of them, sensory integration provided a very powerful reframe and hope that the future can be different.
Yeah.
Well, gosh, we're down to our last couple minutes, right, Suzanne? Oh, we only have about
We are.
left.
So, Roz, I don't know if you had were you going to say something?
No, I was just getting ready and reflecting that what I found, just to add to what Kath was mentioning there, again, the environment of the sensory integration space, being able to get movement, being able to use deep pressure through some of the equipment, is a fantastic way in which a young person, and maybe with the parents or people, adults around them, the adult can start to talk and start to express and be able to share some of their anxiety and emotional distress. And it's just, it's really told me a lot about how the equipment can help to support that narrative and the movement.
Well, one of the things, as we sort of wrap this up, one of the things that comes to my mind is we will get questions, you know, do we not have research on SI with adults? And what I would say is that all of you, the participants in the webinar, you can see that the work is going on, but much more work needs to be done. But I don't think that should hold us back from trying to apply our tools.
Oh, I think we got, is Suzanne freezing a little bit, or are you all
She
here?
is.
Yes.
I think Suzanne's frozen.
Yeah, I think we're losing you, Suzanne, but.
With adults who need this help and as who are aging out of the arenas with landing. So anyway, I would encourage everybody who's interested to go forward, do the practice, do the research. I don't know, Zoe.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, gosh, we could go on and on. We had so many comments and questions. We're sorry that we can't get
We
to.
do. And some
everything.
people, I'm sorry, Zoe, but some people are asking for some resources and book references. And Ross was saying that maybe Ross and Kat, we can send it to me, and then we'll send with the replay and some links or whatever you want to include for all the participants.
Yes, and we'll send a link to Emma's film, and Karen and Emma, if you have anything else you'd like us to share, anything about how you got started with typing and the communication, people would probably appreciate knowing more about that.
If you share resources like that, that would be wonderful.
Okay, great.
And I started reading Leaders Around Me. It'll make you cry. It's beautiful. I highly recommend it. Yeah. Oh, you will love.
And you wait, Karen, say something so we can see it on the big screen. We can see the book.
Oh, there we go. This is a book that just came out last year. It's a collaboration of young adults like Emma herself. Emma's a co-author in it, and they tell their story about how they started typing and what they're doing now in their lives.
How cool.
Great.
Really
Beautiful.
We'll add that link as well.
Well, with that.
And Suzanne, wait, can you tell us what's happening
next week?
And also, I think we should just let people know that we are planning these wind down Wednesdays through July. This is a special time that we're gathering during the pandemic. And so that we're planning to continue this through July.
Well, July 15th to be exact. So we have webinars planned all the way through July 15th. July 15th will be very, very special because it will be the special webinar, maybe even longer than an hour for the celebration of Dr. Ayres' 100th birthday.
Wow, that's right.
And the party.
It's a party. It'll be a party. And next week, if I'm not mistaken, is this when Verco and Southpaw are joining us?
No, I have to check. I don't know. I count on you.
We will let you know, but I think next week is when we're going to invite equipment manufacturers that are looking at COVID specific protection and extra support. I think they're also looking at materials for adults. And Sue Troutman will join us as well. She's a beloved colleague and very well experienced clinic owner, recently retired, and she's creating an online module for us on building clinics. So I think that's next week, and all of the
you're absolutely right, Suzanne. That's the plan for next week.
Thank you. And we will be back at 5 p.m. When we have our international guests, we will be at 10, but next week it's all U.S. guests, so we'll be back at 5 p.m.
With
wine.
Nice meeting everyone.
Thank
Nice
you.
to meet you. Thank you, Emma.
So much from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you so much, Emma. You're amazing.
You're amazing.
Thank you all. Thank you. Bye.
Well, Zoe, it's your line now.
Stay positive, stay connected, stay safe.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Ciao.
Bye.